Well, hello, good afternoon, evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Spencer Ruckty. I'm the author events manager here at Third Place Books in Seattle, Washington, which is where I'm calling from. We are so happy to have Sarah Gailey and Nisi Shawl with us today. The topic of today's conversation is Sarah's brand new novel, Just Like Home, which I have a corporeal copy here in my hands. And we are so excited to bring this conversation to our virtual space. First of all, I want to invite all of you who are watching to use the chat window at the bottom of your screen and say hello and let us know where you're calling in from. And while you're doing that, Third Place Books has a great lineup of virtual and in-person events this season. If you're in the area on August 2nd, we have Jamie Ford here at our Lake Forest Park store. For his latest novel, The Many Daughters of Afong Moy. And on August 9th, we will be teaming up with Community Bookstore in Brooklyn, Powell's in Portland, and Seminary Co-op in Chicago to host a virtual conversation between one of my favorite novelists, Jesse Ball, and Max Porter for Jesse's book, Auto Portrait. You can visit our website, thirdplacebooks.com, to learn more about our stores and to sign up for our email newsletter so you never miss out on another author event. As mentioned, the chat window at the bottom of your screen is open and we encourage you to use it respectfully. During the last 15 minutes or so, we will also have time for your questions. So if you have questions for our authors this evening, you can please submit those to the Q&A window below, which is separate from the chat window at the bottom of your screen. We also offer closed captioning. For those of you who are interested, you can just hit the live transcript button at the bottom of your window to turn this feature on or off. A reminder that this event is going to be recorded, so if you miss anything, we'll be emailing a recording to everyone who registered. And of course, you can order Just Like Home from Third Place Books, or just drop by any of your local bookstores. Conversations like this one are intentionally free and open to the public, and every purchase you make supports the future of this author series, so thank you. And now, without further ado, I am very pleased to be introducing tonight's speakers. Sarah Gailey is a Hugo Award-winning and best-selling author of speculative fiction, short stories, and essays. They have been a finalist for the Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards for multiple years. Their best-selling adult novel debut, Magic for Liars, was published by Tor Books in 2019, and NPR wrote of Gailey's follow-up novel, The Echo Wife, quote, "Science fiction and murder mysteries taste great together, and Gailey layers those ingredients together with a chef's kiss." Joining Sarah in conversation is Nisi Shawl, whose debut novel Everfair was a finalist for the Nebula Award. They co-authored Writing the Other, A Practical Approach, which is a standard text on inclusivity, and edited the multiple award-winning anthology New Sons, speculative fiction by people of color. Their horror collection, Our Fruiting Bodies, is forthcoming from Aqueduct Press, which is a wonderful small press based here in Seattle. A press that publishes challenging feminist science fiction for the demanding reader. This evening, the topic is Sarah's new book, Just Like Home, which is a supernatural gothic thriller for fans of Shirley Jackson and true crime podcasts. Booklist writes that Just Like Home is delightfully creepy and heartbreakingly tragic, and a must-read for all gothic horror fans. We're so pleased to have these two authors with us today, and I will now pass the screen over to Sarah and Nisi. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Spencer. Thank you, Third Place. Thank you so much, Nisi, for joining me today. I have been looking forward to talking to you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here with you today.
Likewise. I am very thrilled because I don't have to do anything right at the beginning. It's going to be all Sarah. Sarah is going to be reading. Yes?
Yes, I'm going to kick us off with a reading from this book, Just Like Home, which Spencer so beautifully introduced. If you're not already familiar with the premise, Just Like Home is a book about a woman who returns to her childhood home to care for her dying mother and confront the legacy of her serial killer father and what is in the house with her. I'm going to do a short reading. Nisi, I know I had told you earlier that I was going to do chapter 1, but I decided I want to do chapter 5 instead, because I just love this chapter so much. And while I was sitting waiting to get started, I couldn't stop thinking about how fun it would be to kick us off by really getting into the gross parts, because this is a very gross book. So I will start at that. Chapter 1's too nice. I don't want to let these guys off easy. All right, so you already know everything you need to know about this book to understand this reading, so I'm going to just jump right in if that's okay. Vera awoke in the closet of her childhood bedroom, knees bent high in front of her, toes curling on the dark brown wood of the floor. Closet door was open. She tried to see out into the room, to the moonlit square of the window. She tried to peer under the bed, but the night was dense and the shadows in the room were deep and the darkness beneath the bed was thickest of all. She was tucked into the corner of the closet tight, the walls snug against her arms, her bare spine curving into the angle where the walls joined. When Vera's father built the Crowder house, he did a good job insulating it. The cool, fresh air of the night stayed out while the slow building heat of the day stayed in. The walls stayed warm as skin. Still, Vera shivered in the darkness of the closet. The night was warm, the house was warm, the room was warm, but she was cold, cold from the inside, a kind of cold that fought against her with grunting strength and bulging veins. Her hand drifted to the old key that still hung around her neck and squeezed hard enough to feel the bite of the metal against her palm. Then she let her hand drop to her belly because there, right there, that's where the cold was coming from, just a palm's width to the right of her navel. Right there. She looked down and could almost see herself through the pressing down darkness, a pale, naked, hunched-over thing, vulnerable and alone. Her hair fell around her face as she curled in on herself. She blew a tendril out of her eyes as though that would help anything. Vera couldn't see much, but she could see just enough, shades of black and gray. She could see by straining that there was something stuck to her. It was dark against the pale plane of her abdomen. She pressed against the edge with a fingertip, experimental, gentle. She gasped. It was so cold. It was the thing that was making her so cold. She had it now. She let out a shaking, shivering breath and pressed against the thing again, harder this time, and she gasped again because when she pressed down, her finger slipped inside the dark thing. She knew at once that she'd been wrong. It wasn't something stuck to her. It was a hole. Of course. This was the hole in her stomach. She knew what to do about this. She knew how to make herself less cold. She dug her finger deeper into the hole, arched her knuckle to make room for a second finger to slip in alongside it. The movement made the key swing on its chain, bumping back and forth between her goose-fleshed breasts. Her skin stretched tight around her fingers, but it didn't hurt. It was too cold to hurt. Her hand was shaking, but it was just because of the thing inside the hole. Once she got that thing out, she could go back to bed and be warm. The thing inside the hole in her belly was slippery and freezing, but she knew she could get it if she could just stop trembling. Vera's fingers were inside the hole in her belly all the way to the last knuckle, aching with cold. They would be numb soon. She had to hurry. She took a deep breath in through her nose, let it out slowly through her mouth. She had to stop shivering. It would only take a moment, and then it would be out of her, and then she could be warm again. She hooked her fingers around the thing inside of her, and carefully, slowly, so it couldn't slip out of her grip, she pulled. It unspooled fast and sudden like a fish sliding out of a net. She let out a sob of relief as the long gray rope fell to the floor with a wet laundry splat. But she was still so cold. Her relief turned to dismay, then crystallized into determination. It wasn't all out of her yet. She had to get it out. She had to get it out in order to be good. She had to get it out so it couldn't go bad inside her. Vera wrapped her hands around the section that hung just outside the hole, her fists filled with whatever this awful thing was that had been coiled up in her gut. She clenched her jaw at how painfully cold it was and pulled hard. There was so much of it, so much more than she'd expected. She pulled out lengths of it, hand over hand, like climbing a rope in gym class, which she'd never been good at, but she couldn't stop now, piling loops of frigid meat between her feet, her toes curled tight against the wood floor, her teeth chattering. Vera woke up with a start. Without a gasp, her eyes flying open. She was in her bed, and her heart was pounding, but the nightmare, at least, was over. She tried to lift her hands to her belly to reassure herself. It was just a dream. There is no hole. Your intestines are warm and pink, and they are inside where they belong, and there is no hole to pull them out of. It was just a dream. She tried to lift her hands, but she couldn't. She couldn't move her hands at all. She couldn't move her arms either, or her legs. She screamed silently at her limbs to obey her, but they wouldn't. Her heart was beating so hard and so loud that she was sure she was dying. She tried to scream, but the only sound that came from her throat was a thin whine. She squeezed her eyes shut tight. Sleep paralysis, that was all. She'd had it before once or twice as a teenager, and that was happening again. She'd done a packet on it, B+, but the content had stuck with her. She repeated the facts to herself, trying hard not to be afraid. Her brain had just gotten its wires crossed, woken up her conscious mind before waking up her body. That was all. She'd had a nightmare, and she'd woken up in the wrong order, and it would pass soon, and she would be fine. Don't worry. Her eyes snapped open again at the sound of the voice. I'm here. You can go back to sleep. It was right next to her ear. She couldn't make herself turn her head to see it, but she could feel how close it was. The voice was right there, right by her ear, practically on her pillow. Vera's chest ached, bruised from the inside by the frantic racing of her heart. She strained as hard as she could. She had to move. Don't worry. Just close your eyes. The voice was speaking in a half-whisper, rasping and tender. It sounded so familiar. She had to move. She had to turn on the light. She had to scream. She could swear she recognized that whisper. It was just a bad dream. You're all in one piece now. Go on back to sleep, Vera, baby. She could feel the breath of the speaker against her ear. It was cool and close, and it smelled like rot and cut grass and turned earth and sweet lemon. But Vera could not see the lips that brushed the tender skin just below her earlobe. Hush now. That did it. Vera's entire body flashed hot with adrenaline, and her limbs got the fucking memo, and her voice unlocked itself, and finally, she could move. She ran. She scrambled across the bed away from the voice, half fell on her way to the door. She screamed, and it was a real scream, one that tore out of her, and the long, weedy roots of it were wrapped around her pelvic bone, and she meant it. She slapped frantically at the wall, and on the third try, her palm found the light switch, and then the room was bright, and the shadows were dead, and she turned around to see who was there, who was with her, who was in her ear, telling her to go back to sleep. The room was empty. The bed sheets were dark with sweat crumpled around the place where she'd been. Quickly, so she couldn't scare herself out of doing it, she ducked down to look under the bed. There was nothing there. Of course there was nothing there. There was nothing behind the gauzy curtains that covered the window either. There was no one in the closet. She flung the door open fast, as though somehow the element of surprise would give her an advantage over anyone who might be hiding there. The corners of the room were illuminated and bare, and the floor was clean, and Vera was alone. She crawled back into the bed and sat right in the center of the mattress, the blankets gathered close around her. She clutched her arms, hoping she'd leave bruises, so that the next morning she would know this had been as awful and urgent as it felt. It was a dream, she told herself. She closed her eyes and tried to dial her breathing down as slow as she could make it, but then with a shiver she opened her eyes again because she was doing the same calm breathing she'd done when she couldn't move, when she was frozen, trapped with those lips breathing soft words against her throat, and what if breathing that way again summoned the theme back? A dream, she said again, more firmly this time. She said it out loud, trying to compel herself to hear the words, to believe them. She was being absurd, panicky, ridiculous. Breathing couldn't summon anything. And besides, there was no voice to summon. It had been a remnant of her nightmare, a figment of her subconscious, nothing more. She had checked. The room was empty except for her. The door was locked. The lights were on. The sun would come up in a few more hours. She closed her eyes and did not allow herself to think about how badly she'd wanted to lean into the comfort that awful voice had promised. She did not allow herself to think about how familiar the voice was. That's chapter 5 of Just Like Home. It's a nice book.
Oh, it's so sweet and kind and gentle.
Yes,
Not.
very friendly.
Wow. Yeah, there's a comment from someone in the chat, just one vowel over and over and over again. Yeah. So yes, the cold was the sort of the representation of evil in that section. And the cold was internal. I love that. There's also a thing where grease is like the foulness, the evil, is personified, or I would say concretized as grease. But where I come from, grease is good. You don't want to have food without grease. You know, you put grease on your hair, grease on your skin. What is the grease from? Where did you get the grease as evil?
You know, in bringing grease out of people, that's kind of, for people who haven't read this yet, the way that Vera's serial killer father believes that evil can be removed from the human body. I was picturing machine grease, not the kind of grease that, you know, I and you and so many others love to use to make our immediate physical lives better, but a grease that is necessary in a lot of the way that the world functions, but that we don't love coming into contact with. I wanted it to be something that is so difficult to remove. Grease, you know, that kind of machine grease, like a bicycle chain grease, gets on you, and it's so hard to take off, and it spreads so easily. I wanted to bring that into this book as a sense of kind of indelibility and inescapability. As Vera is moving through her childhood home, she keeps encountering this grease and finding it on her hands, and it's very tactile and immediate and sort of invasive in a sensory way that I wanted to ground the reader in.
It's sort of like the opposite of house cleaning.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the most talking about the Gothic novel and the way that women and housewives in particular are tied to it. Your most recent work that I've read is Upright Women Wanted, which, like your brilliant debut, River of Teeth, not a novel, a novella. Okay, but it played with tropes of the Western, just like Holmes seems to mess with the tropes of the Gothic novel. So has that been an obsession of yours before, or did it just develop from the Western? Were they concurrent?
I mean, I love this question because I love so many different genres and so many different things about them. But when I write in different genres, I realize that I'm consistently being drawn to the same thing over and over again, just in a different context. A lot of my fascination with Westerns is about who has been, in the history of United States media, allowed to be part of a Western narrative and who has been excluded from a Western narrative. Part of what I loved in writing River of Teeth and Upright Women Wanted was saying these stories actually belong to different people than who we've frequently been told they belong to. And in the Gothic novel, I'm so much drawn to the same thing. You know, this story centers so much on a serial killer, and a lot of US fascination with serial killers is sort of based on almost celebrating the killer, as saying, oh, yeah, he's so interesting, oh, he's so fascinating, what is his mind like, what's he thinking, what's he feeling, how does he get away with it? When the answer to what is he thinking, what is he feeling is often, I'm a white supremacist who hates women. And the answer to how does he get away with it is often because our justice, our police system, like, reinforces that kind of person getting away with causing harm to people. It's just not that interesting to me. And so I really wanted to, in writing this very Gothic story about a serial killer, focus instead on his environment and surroundings, and not on how he reacts to his environment and surroundings, but how his environment and surroundings react to him. I think Gothic literature is so often about the impacts terrible things have on their environment. And I just loved exploring that and diving into it, and never once thinking to celebrate Francis Crowder.
I love that you're like reversing the gaze almost. Yeah. I'm an old hippie, so I had read a bunch of Richard Brautigan books, and the one that comes to mind in this context is The Hawkline Monster, which is a Gothic novel and a Western at the same time.
Oh, I'm writing this down immediately. I'm sorry, you're going to hear my keyboard because I have to make a note of this. This sounds so fantastic.
It's also a very quick read.
Which I also love these days.
Yeah.
The Hawkline Monster.
A Gothic and that Western
cover is Perfect. Oh, yeah, this is exactly what I need.
Yeah, it's it may cause you to write more books. I don't know.
Oh, no, nobody wants that.
So now I'm going to ask you a question that I want you to take as not oppositional. If this is a serious question, I actually want to know the answer. Are all the characters in Just Like Home white? And I ask this because that's not typical of your novels. So
no, I appreciate this question. It's something that I actually put a lot of thought into as I was writing. All of the primary characters in the narrative are white. There's one Black police officer mentioned, but he's not a major primary character at all. And the reason behind this is very uncomfortable and strange for me. But it's a very small cast, and it's a small cast of people who are hurting each other in enormous ways. The POV-ish character, Vera, is a person who is, this book is very much about exploring her interiority and questions of where she came from and what made her who she was. As a white author, I immediately said to myself, the question of what makes a person who they are is only mine to explore in a white character. I don't have any kind of I don't have anything worth saying or any access, to questions about where people come from when they're growing up in a non-white context. And then you've got her parents, who both of whom are monstrous in their own ways. And I was very uninterested in writing a book in which people of color are victimizing a white woman in the narrative. Like, I'm not going to reinforce that crap. And then we've got the character of James Duvall. He's an artist who is living in the backyard. He's framed very much in a predatory way, and in a lot of ways in a not explicitly sexually predatory way, but the vibe is there. This guy is dangerous and is often kind of framed as sensually or sexually dangerous. And again, no interest for me in building a narrative in which a man of color is preying on a white woman in her home.
Yeah.
That's a narrative I don't want to reinforce. And then the final character who shows up a lot in this narrative is Brandon, Vera's childhood best friend, who I can't say too much about without giving things away, but he suffers quite a lot. And we see a lot of her childhood perspective on him and her sense of confusion as she grapples with feelings of ownership in her friendship with him, and how she navigates that through the lens she's learned through her father. And again, not particularly interested in writing a story in which a white girl character is navigating feelings of ownership and impulses of harm toward a young man of color. So in the end, as I built the cast of this book, I felt that it would be irresponsible to make any of those characters anything but white. And because it was such a small cast, in order to include more diversity, more characters of color in the story, I would have had to zoom out the narrative in a way that I felt would serve it pretty poorly.
Yeah, I can see that that you didn't want to reinforce stereotypes through your writing, especially that resonates with me. I was trying to place it, and I was like, this feels like a small town in the Midwest that I grew up in, where I was really not convinced that Black people were a minority at all. So can you say where it takes place?
Yeah, this book takes place in Marion, New York, which is in upstate New York. Upstate New York is not necessarily a predominantly white area, although there are enclaves that are predominantly white for all kinds of historical reasons that we know about. America, history bad. If this was going to be a film, I would be very happy for the scenes in town, when you kind of see town and get the general flavor of the community, to be much more diverse than the main cast. I just didn't end up going into that community a lot in the narrative of the book, but it's not an intentional choice to make the town itself predominantly white so much as the characters that the story is focused on.
Yeah, I mean, here in the Northwest, there were a bunch of small towns that were like sundown towns historically. So, those would be really white. I just wondered, like,
yes.
Is this where we're going? Yeah.
That was a pretty intentional choice in terms of where it takes place, because for a very slightly different story, if I was exploring more of how a character like Francis Crowder in reality, often white male serial killers are also white supremacists, I would absolutely place it in the Pacific Northwest. I spent quite a bit of time in Oregon, and it is the racism in that state is so loud in the especially in the rural areas outside of Portland that I was spending time in, and I could absolutely see the story being located in a place like that. That said, I did not want to go into making Francis Crowder explicitly a white supremacist serial killer, because he is one of the strangely more sympathetic characters in the story.
It's true. It's true.
I just don't have the craft to pretend that I'm cool with those guys.
Yeah. Okay, so I love this book, and I was, well, because I love what you write, so there.
That means so much to me.
So I read it because you wrote it, and I have feelings about books about serial killers, so I was, reading it at a little bit of a distance. But then I kept reading it, and not just because, it's Sarah Gailey, I gotta read it. I'll just read what I wrote down. The phrase plot twist feels too manipulative to me to describe what I went through as I was reading. But there were not plot twists, there were revelations. Revelation after unexpected revelation. And that's what I would say, rather than twist, revelations. Did you know about these characters before you went into this project? And how much did you know that you were going to gradually show readers?
I mean, before I even answer that, I want to say this is part of why I was so excited to talk to you, because you are so smart about literature, and hearing you say these are revelations, not plot twists, has completely filled up my little author tank inside my soul. That is exactly what I want my books to have, is revelations that are grounded and make sense and are not trying to manipulate the reader. So I just want you to know I'm carving that on the inside of my sternum to revisit on days when I feel like I can't do this job well. I knew going in that I was going to reveal the things that get revealed in the book in broad strokes. I knew what kind of the final big revelation was going to be. I knew what a lot of the things were that readers were going to discover. I thought I knew a lot about the characters when I was going in. I started writing and I was like, this book's basically already written. I'm just going to be a piece of cake.
I love that.
It is the hardest thing I've ever written. Especially because I went through 3 or 4 comprehensive rewrites, and in 2 of them, I completely changed the characterization of every major character, going through and taking everyone who is meant to be appealing in the book and making them threatening, and taking everyone who was originally kind of scary and making them comforting. And the first time I did one of these rewrites, I was like, how is this character nothing like what I initially thought they were? So I ended up not really finding the actual characters until the final rewrite. And kind of like as kids are growing up and you keep meeting them again and again and discovering that they're different people from who you thought they were. This book just completely took me by surprise.
So good. Okay. Because I was worried that I was being manipulated so well that I didn't even know that I was being manipulated. Yeah.
No, certainly
Let
not.
me,
I always want my books to respect the reader. First and foremost, it drives me nuts when a book is like, ah, gotcha, bet you feel stupid now. I think my readers are so smart, and I always want my book to be approaching them with respect.
the process for me, okay, so not that great an analogy, but I've been told that if you put a frog or a lobster in a pot of cold water and then put the pot of cold water on the stove, and then heat it up slowly, they don't realize they're being cooked until they're dead. So that is sort of what this was like. It was like this building dread for instead of heat. But except I was conscious of the dread, of course, rather than, being unconscious of it like the frog or lobster. But what I kept doing was like, I guess it fits with what you were reading of chapter 5. Just keep pulling it out and you will get to the source. And I was like, if I just keep reading, I can understand why I feel this sense of dread. Is that what you wanted to do?
That's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted this book to feel kind of like when you have like a small blemish on your face and you're just convinced that if you just poke it enough, it'll go away instead of becoming this humongous, throbbing, horrible thing. I wanted readers to be saying to themselves, why am I still subjecting myself to this book, but
yes.
unable to stop?
So as you said, this is a gross book. It is, but it's the kind of gross that we enjoy. And many of the images that you recount in Just Like Home have stayed with me, ever since the reading. The image of Daphne, her last appearance, for instance, that was quite resonant and it stuck with me. The worm on the hook when, as a child, Vera remembers as a child going fishing and putting a worm on a hook. But very vivid and very arresting. Do you have a favorite image from this book yourself?
Oh, I do, but it would give away the entire book to say it. At the very end, there is something that is revealed that then tries to conceal itself from Vera and from the reader. And do you ever have those moments when you're writing and you write something and you look at what you wrote and you go, yeah, okay, I can do this job. I'm actually good at this. That was how I felt when I wrote that image. And it's one of the only things that stayed in the book from the first draft to the last draft. Was that image. I had so much fun with imagery in this book. My agent and editor can tell you I don't describe things in early drafts of my work. I have a tendency to have like a mannequin walk into a bare blank beige room and talk about emotions a lot. And my poor agent and editor always have to say, you need to tell us anything about the environment. So with this book, I wrote my sample chapter and I kind of spitefully was like, fine, I'm describing everything. And they said, yeah, good, do more of that. And so this book became an exercise in like rolling around in images and getting really sensory and getting really detailed. And now that turns out that's my favorite thing to write.
Yeah, it is much more full of images than I'm used to from you, but they are gripping images, I have to say. The idea of again, I don't want to spoil this for everybody, but the idea that like you're shedding skin and you're sweating and it's not going away. It's going somewhere, but it's not going away. It's still around. That stayed with
Think
me
about
too.
this. Every time I vacuum my house, I have a bagless vacuum, and I'll vacuum my house, and I'm a pretty clean person. I'll vacuum my house and then I'll go empty the canister into the garbage can, and it opens up and all this stuff falls out. And I'm always like, that's me. That stuff is me. I made that. I'm not bringing dirt into my house from the outside and scattering it around. Like that's this. And it's terrible.
The horror of housework.
Yes. And the fundamental horror of being corporeal.
Can you say anything about, I'm sure you're being compared everywhere to Shirley Jackson. Can you say anything about the Gothic form and houseness?
Oh my gosh, yes. The Shirley Jackson comparisons are the other thing that I'm inscribing on my sternum, right next to you saying that this book has revelations and not twists, because it's, I mean, obviously she is, to me, the great of the genre. She is like everything that I love to read, everything that I hope to create, and something that I very intentionally wanted to reflect in my work that she reflects in her work a lot. Something that I was sitting there going, Shirley Jackson, please be with me as I'm writing this. It's both the horror of family, you know, the way that horror is between people and families are so close to each other that they can't help but inflict horrors on each other often. And the way that a home becomes a container for that, and a container for grief, and a container for all of the worst things that happen to us, and also all of our most intimate and vulnerable moments. And most of all, the way that I think she brings into her Gothic writing, that a happy ending isn't the same for everyone. In this book, some characters get a happy ending. They get an ending that is joyful and fulfilling for them. And my goal was for a reader to look at that ending and go, that seems terrible, but good for you, I think. The way that I often do when I'm reading Shirley Jackson. I often read her work, and the people in her work are like, we did it. And I, as a reader, am like, don't.
Yeah. Also, I Capture the Castle. It reminded me a bit of that. Just because, I mean, not in a bad way, but just because, yes, people have these goals, and when they meet their goals, you should be happy for them. And yet, if it was you in their position, no, not so much.
I mean, I have had readers of Magic Thrillers and the Echo Wife ask me, like, how am I supposed to emulate these characters? I don't understand it. It doesn't seem like they're doing good things, but they're the protagonist, right? And just like Home, I feel is kind of an escalation of that idea that, you know, ultimately you could call Vera's arc as a character one of learning to be yourself, no matter what. Some people should not follow that advice. Being self-empowered and self-motivated and a girl boss is not always the greatest outcome.
Wow, people actually are looking to learn how to behave from reading your books. Does that give you pause?
Oh, it scares the daylights out of me. These are not instruction manuals on how to live.
How can we emulate them? Ooh.
What am I supposed to learn from this character? Nothing. No.
So I'm sorry, I need to ask about something besides this book now. What are you working on at the moment?
I'm working on simultaneously comics and my next novel. So for comics, I have the incredible pleasure of writing a new Buffy the Vampire Slayer universe, which I'm having so much fun with. It is such the opposite vibe of what I usually work on. And so I'm getting to exercise some humor and also trying to bring a new perspective to a troubled franchise. And at the same time, I'm working on my next novel for Tor, which I can't say a ton about because we haven't announced it yet, but I can say that I am doing so much research on cult dynamics and high control dynamics in which people manipulate the people around them into giving up control of their lives. And it's so eye-opening to do research into that topic, and also so scary.
I know people who that is their hobby, that is their pleasure reading, is reading about cults. Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting, and I strongly recommend it. I remember calling some loved ones of mine after I finished reading a book called Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, that breaks down how language is used in cult dynamics and how that bleeds into our everyday life, and especially into sales when companies are trying to sell us things. And I called several people and said, you have to read this book so that you can recognize when, you know, like your next door neighbor is trying to get you to join a multi-level marketing scheme that turns out to be a cult, which has happened to multiple people in my life. But it's also, I would not consider it light or pleasurable. It is, it's like taking a self-defense class.
Yeah, we have a number of booksellers who love that book. I just posted a link to it in the chat, but Cultish is a wild ride. It is, but very informative book. We love it.
You can buy it at Third Place Books.
And you can buy it at Third Place Books, that's right. Or pick it up at your local library. No, I was just popping back on screen to usher in the audience Q&A portion of the event. So for everyone listening and watching right now, if you have questions for our authors, please do submit those to the Q&A, or I can also catch them from the chat. But before we do that, Sarah, I did want to ask you, you are working on you have been working on another comic book series, correct? Eat the Rich. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that and how that's been going. I know the first trade collected volume just came out in May, I believe.
Yes, yeah. Came out very close to the paperback of The Echo Wife. It was kind of a whirlwind month. Yeah, so Eat the Rich is my first original comic series with Boom Studios. It's a limited series, so the entire thing is out already. If you buy the trade collection, you're getting the whole story. It was drawn by P.S. Bach, who is just spectacular, really, really excellent art from him. It's the story of a young woman who goes with her boyfriend to his family estate over the summer and is hoping to become part of this family. They're extraordinarily wealthy, and over the time she spends with them, she discovers that they have some dark and unseemly appetites. It is a pretty blatant story about classism and income inequality and what I think we should do with the very wealthy. And I had so much fun writing it. And it is a very it's horror and comedy and instruction manual. If you should learn from any of my books, it's this one.
If you're looking for literature as self-help, then yes, there you go. There's an instruction manual.
This is the only one. For legal purposes, this is a joke, officer.
Yes. For those of you listening, FBI. We have it all three of our this collection, all three of our stores. I encourage all of you to check it out. I just posted another link into the chat. Sorry, a fly just flew into my mouth. It's okay. I think it left, but well, let's get to audience Q&A then. Let's see. Swati says, I love your writing, and part of that is how different your books are from one another. I'm curious about your origin story as a writer, your influences, and anything else.
I mean, first of all, thank you for liking the things that I write. I'm always so honored by readers giving their time to my books and my stories. My origin story as a writer, I've never thought of it that way. I've always been very into stories and books. I grew up kind of half the time in the back room of an independent bookstore where my mom worked, and half the time crawling around underneath bookshelves at the county library where she spent a lot of time volunteering. And so I've sort of just always been ambiently absorbing books, like it's just in my DNA a little bit. But I didn't want to be a writer for a long time. It hadn't occurred to me as something I could really do. The very first story that I wrote, though, is what I'm gonna share that with you guys, because it's like, I think the best thing I've ever written. Was when I was in first grade. My school had this contest called the Young Authors Contest, where it was like, write a book, it's, like a 6 or 7 page story that you illustrate with crayons, and then the teacher binds it together with a little thing, and it's like, look, you wrote a book, you published a book, very exciting. And mine, I was really obsessed with boiling acid at the time. I was like, assumed that this and quicksand were going to be big problems in my life, so I wrote this story where the Queen of England comes to visit the town, and the boiling acid factory has a problem, and a big wave of boiling acid comes out of the factory and hits the Queen's limo. And the Queen doesn't die because the limo driver stands between her and the tidal wave of boiling acid, which, as you both know, is a foolproof solution to being protected from boiling acid. And then he becomes a scary glowing ghost in the town. And I'm going to be honest with you, nothing I've written is ever going to stand up to that story. There's a lot of crayon drawings of skeletons, a lot of crayon drawings of bright green boiling acid waves. So this second rate, I'm so sorry to tell you, just like home, doesn't feature any boiling acid.
Well, when they collect your work in the Library of America hardcover editions, that can be the first entry there, complete with colorized drawings. They have the money; they can do color. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we can shell out for that. So I think that's really my origin story as an author. The part where I became a grown up and I did all this other crap with my life, and then I tried my handwriting short stories, and the friend who I shared them with was really mean to me about them. And I said, I'm not allowed to be a writer. And I said, okay, I am going to be a writer. That's all secondary. It really started with the boiling acid. Now, if I was writing it now, I don't know that I would save. If I was writing it now, I don't know that I would save royalty at the cost of a working class person. But, kids absorb all kind of ideals.
Right. Let's see. We have another question from Sarah, who says, how long do you usually spend researching a topic for one of your books?
You know what? This answer is changing the longer I'm a writer. Early on, almost no time. I would research the bare minimum. I would start writing, and I would write until I hit a thing that I didn't know about, and then I would look it up, and then I would go, great, that's sufficient. And the longer I've been writing and the more I've learned about disinformation and about source interrogation, the more I've recognized that I don't know jack shit. I don't know anything. And I've started becoming so much more interested in writing about things that require deeper understanding. Yeah. So, when I wrote River of Teeth, this is something that is very genuinely funny to me and not harmful. So I'm fine thinking of it as a humorous anecdote instead of mortifying. Right? There's a scene in River of Teeth where a bunch of cowboy types are playing a card game around a table. And they do that classic Western thing where one guy goes, "You cheated," and then everybody pulls their guns. And it's very, tense little standoff. It's completely pulp Western trope extravaganza. And I wrote that, I turned it in, and my genius editor, Justin Landon, who's really wonderful, gave me my edit notes, and one of them was, what game are they playing? And I was chatting with him, and I said, they're playing poker. And Justin said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, they're playing poker. And Justin said, how do you think poker is played? And That's how I discovered I don't know how poker is played. I have no idea. I was like, the guy gives you some cards and you look at them, and if you don't like them, you say no, not those cards. And Justin said, okay, this is either you need to research and understand how poker works, or you need to make this game legible as something else, which is the direction I ended up going. But that was how I used to write. I would go, I'm pretty sure I know about this more or less. Yeah, I can get it.
Yeah,
now,
I've heard there's nothing more grounding than getting your notes back from a copy editor.
Yeah.
Who sometimes serve as fact checkers as well, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, they do so much important work saving me from showing my ass to readers. In Magic for Liars, there's a scene where a bartender's cutting up limes, and in the original draft, I said, oh, he scrapes the seeds off the cutting board into the trash. And my copy editor, incredible, my copy editor responded and was like, hey, just so you know, most species of limes that we use in the United States are bred specifically to be seedless. Never occurred to me, but that kind of fact checking is so valuable, and has, I think, turned me into more of a research person. So for Just Like Home, it's very house oriented, and it takes place inside a house, and you have a lot of information about how the house is built. And it was a very poker game situation while I was writing it. I was like, I'm sure I know how houses are built. You got wall, roof, door. I was writing, and I was like, wait a minute. There's so much in a house that I don't know about. So I had to learn so much about constructing a house. And then now for this cult book, I mean, this is the first time I think ever that I started doing research 6 months before I started writing.
Wow.
Just trying to understand the dynamics from a place beyond intuition. So much of my writing is intuition and assumption, and then I have to go back and scoop all that out. And this time I'm trying really hard to go in more informed. And I hope that I keep getting more and more researchy the longer I'm writing. I hope that I end up like, oh, I need to spend a year and a half reading and researching before I can even come up with the idea. My editor will probably not like this if I do it. I'm sorry, Miriam, if you're watching.
No, I imagine that can be really paralyzing too. To feel like you have to know everything before you approach a topic, and I imagine that's especially in science fiction.
Yep.
Both of your genres, that can be right, like feeling like you have to have a master's in physics before you start writing. Before you start writing about imaginary world. I mean, that's crazy.
I was going to ask Nisi, how much research do you usually do before you dive in?
I usually research as I go, but that doesn't mean that I ever stop. I keep researching as I'm writing and as I'm revising and all that. And, it's nice to have some research done beforehand as a place to start. But for instance, there are entire characters and storylines that came out of research that I did like in the early chapters of a book. So yeah, because if you think you have to get to a certain point, that could be, as you say, Spencer, paralyzing. But if you think that you're done, nope.
Has that feeling of there's always going to be something more to learn, right?
Yep.
I also find it really generative. I find that when I am doing research, I end up going, oh my gosh, this opens up so many ideas.
Yep.
We have time for one more question, and we're going to go with Jen, who says, I love your newsletter Stone Soup for so many reasons, but I especially loved your series on personal canons. You mentioned Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Reed and The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. Are there any other books that inform your personal canon? Do they change at all for genre? For example, horror? And Nisi, what books would you consider part of your personal canon?
I need to know what a personal canon is.
Oh, okay. So
that's a great question.
This was the series that I ran through my newsletter. There was this big conversation happening in kind of SFF Twitter at the time about what books are part of canon and what defines the canon of SFF literature.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a ton of old white guys were like what everybody was saying. And then, you know, the discourse cycle happened that's like, hey, this is racist, classist, homophobic, etc. And I tend to steer away from prescriptivism in most cases. And my stance on it, that I did not contribute to the discourse, but did turn into this series of essays that I published from a variety of authors, is that canon is ultimately personal when it comes to SFF. It's not that the genre is defined by certain writers, it's that you as a reader and as a writer are defined by certain stories. And so I managed to raise some money and solicited essays from a wide variety of people talking about what their formative canon was, what they consider essential to their own understanding of the genre. I had so much fun with it. Jen, thank you for bringing it up. I'm always so happy when people have read that. And I actually keep my personal canon on a little shelf right here.
Can't
not
see
even
it.
for reference. It's just behind. It's just behind you. I can't actually reach the books without a stepladder. They're up too high. They're not there for reference. They're there as a reminder. So what I've got up there is The Enchanted by Renee Denfeld, which is a beautiful book that incorporates a lot of kind of fabulous imagery to talk about the horrors of United States prison conditions. The Godfather by Mario Puzo, which I don't recommend anyone read. It is deranged, but I have reread it every year since I was a teenager, and it has informed so much of my life and myself, and every time I reread it, I find something else that's awful about it. All of these scary stories to tell in the dark books. Lies My Teacher Told Me by James W. Lowen, which is the first book that made me go, hey, the way that Americans understand our own history is fundamentally extraordinarily flawed, and that's due to explicit manipulation from Christo-fascist leading parties. As you mentioned, The Thief of Always by Clive Barker, Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller, which is an examination of queerness and taxonomy, and which was the first thing that made me say categories are bullshit, and I will not subscribe to them. My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, and Mama Day by Gloria Naylor. That is everything that's on that shelf. There's more behind it in the titles that I can't see right now, but those are the ones that are really dear to my heart. I also reread The Godfather, Mama Day, and The Enchanted at least once every couple of years to remind myself what I'm trying to do.
So we have a shared title in Mama Day. That's why I was gasping when you said that, because yeah, that book does so many wonderful things, and I need to learn from it all the time. Yeah,
all the time. It is stunning. It's a stunning book. And then of course everything Shirley Jackson's ever done is in there.
So just very quickly, the only two or three titles I would put up there with that is a short story called Le Toutournier by Colette, Empire Star by Samuel Delaney, and Little Big by John Crowley.
A few more notes. You're giving me such a good reading list
today.
I
love hearing about people's personal canons, like the constellations that they follow when they're writing. I mean, that is really cool to hear.
Yeah.
And I find the idea of a canon as being internal so much more interesting, because you know, you can name the names of people who have sold a lot of books, but are they the ones who've really had an impact on you as a person? I don't know.
Yeah.
Far more interesting.
Mama Day.
Well, that's Mama Day.
It is a stunning book. Every time I reread it, I'm like, oh, this is what writing can be. Every time.
Here it is.
And you can buy it at Third Place Books.
That's right. Looks like we don't have any copies on hand right now. We might have some used copies, but at the very least, it is orderable. We can order it, so it's still in print. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much, Nisi. This was really fun. Do you have any, final remarks before we head out for the afternoon, evening?
Subject yourself to Just Like Home. You will be happy that you did. and you won't, and don't follow in anyone's footsteps in that novel, but enjoy watching them.
Thank you so much, Nisi, for doing this with me. This has been such a pleasure. I in hindsight can look back and affirm that I was right to be looking so much forward to this, because you're just a wonderful person to spend an hour with, and it means so much to me that you subjected yourself to this book. I don't want to say enjoyed. And thank you, Spencer, for hosting us. I love Third Place. I want someday to be able to come back there in person without the looming threat of a twin demic.
Yeah, of course.
Taking us all out. I'm so grateful to you for hosting us, and thank you everyone who joined us today. You are all wonders.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming out and for watching. Like I said, this will be posted to YouTube, so you can go and enjoy the fun over and over again and catch any of those titles that you might have missed. Other than that, please have a wonderful evening, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
Everybody take care.